Welcome to Revive Ministries Podcast. Today we are talking about family and recovery. Families can be the most supportive component to one's recovery or the least. Today I have a new guest. Her name is Ruth, and I'm very excited to have her and for her to share insight. Thank you, Ruth, for coming on and sharing, discussing this. Really, this is kind of I've been trying, especially to get closer to the holidays, to always address the family component when it comes to recovery. Thank you, Ruth, for coming on.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Well, I always begin with a disclaimer for those who are in crisis around the U.S. The 1-800-273-8255 is National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. But I do encourage those who are listening, because I know a lot listen outside of the United States, try to find what's available in your area. I know it's not always ideal, but support comes in many different ways. So with that being said, I start out with a quote, Ruth. I know people say things better than I do, so let's just go with Anthony Lacone. I love how he says this. He says, everyone needs a house to live in, but a supportive family is what builds a home. Absolutely. What comes to mind?
Well, you need that sense of home. That means you have support. A house is just a house, figuratively and literally. You can be under the same roof, and if you don't have that support, you don't have people encouraging you and helping you in your recovery, you're not going to recover as quickly. So, that's how I see the difference between house and home.
Yeah, I think definitions and words are very interesting. When we think about house, it sounds so fundamentally small, but there's something different about saying home. It sounds that there's just not just a building, there's more. In recovery, unfortunately, we kind of, house and a place to stay, and then physically, with some of the people I work with, can often be an issue. Unfortunately, sometimes with that being said, it gets kind of overlooked, the emphasis of a home. Yes. Depending on your social economic status, families often scramble to find family residency, which is understandable. I'm not minimizing that at all. But the social component, the support that comes without just walls and the roof is also very important. Ruth, I want to ask you, when I was deciding every new guest, I'm like, what would be the best fit? And I remember reading a little bit what you wrote me, and I thought, this would be the best. So, Ruth, what has been your experience in the impact in providing a house versus a home regarding recovery? What has been your experience?
Well, for me personally, a little bit about my background. I was diagnosed with Bipolar II depression about 16 years ago. And, I am married, had 3 small children at the time. And unfortunately, my husband and I were not in the same place when it came to understanding what this disease was. So for me, I didn't have that support that I needed to begin the recovery. So we were under the same roof, but it was difficult because there was no sense of home. There was no sense of support. There was no sense of encouragement there. And that made a difference in how my recovery went, which, in the beginning, it didn't go at all. So yeah. Once that began to change and the house became more of a home, that's when the recovery started accelerating.
One thing, especially some of my, I do a lot of groups, and one of the biggest concerns or complaints, I would say, is that they're not feeling heard. A lot of times, people struggling with mental illness or substance use or any kind of recovery, they don't feel heard. Like let's just be honest, recovery is messy.
Yes.
It can be very messy. And I remember even my own recovery, a lot of times I was short-sighted. I'm like, why can't they get it? Mm-hmm. And it's not that easy. We are so complicated. And at the same time, it's not entirely them getting it, because they won't truly get it, but they can also support without getting it. It's like sometimes we kind of have this emphasis that they have to understand every little minute detail of what's going on. And I find that less useful as opposed to just being a supportive network. Like you said, you could be in the house and be very much alone.
Right.
I could be around a lot of people and feel alone. Being
Right.
present with someone is kind of rare nowadays. Being like, I try to practice this myself, but I have a phone and I look at it at times. Someone's talking to me in front of me. I'm like, why am I doing that? I have to stay present, and a lot of times, I have to actively practice that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that was one of the things that I had to come to terms with. It was the fact that, my husband didn't understand me.
Mhm.
My kids were there, but, they're a lot younger. That wasn't their part of their world. So no one understood me, but I
Mhm.
had to be okay with that. And I had to, they had to come to terms with, okay, I don't know what they're going through, but if I love them enough,
Mhm.
I'm just going to be there for them. So, it was kind of a little bit of give and take on both ends. And I think that that's where we have to meet. Because to be honest, even if two people have bipolar, it's
Mhm.
going to look different for
Yeah.
those two people. So there is no cookie cutter. There is no, okay, textbook. Everything is customized. Everything is individual. So even if I have it and you have it,
Mhm.
it's going to look different. So we're not going to really say, okay, I understand. Not 100%, but I have to
Mhm.
be willing to be open to at least love you enough to say, okay, whatever you're going through, I'm here for you.
And I like that because a lot of times we don't even think about or even talk about it, the idea
Hmm.
of it's okay that people don't understand.
Hmm.
Like, remember the character of those family members, those people that are really close. Like, it's a lot to ask for. For me,
Yes.
being one who's going through recovery, and
Hmm.
also working with people who are recovering, is very different. Defining words and creating a safe place is absolutely important. It's hugely
Yes.
important.
Yes.
There's a lot of smart people out there, Ruth. They know a lot of things, but there's not a lot of wise people. It's
Right.
not knowing stuff; it's knowing when to say it.
Yes.
Unfortunately, we don't allow people or even ourselves a lot of times to process things.
Hmm.
We're going through trauma or we're going through whatever. We want certainty where there isn't. A lot of times we just kind of immerse ourselves in the unknown that we don't know. And I feel, like you said, recovery is different. Everyone, if
Yeah.
I had, you know, if I was struggling even with the same thing as you, it will look different.
Yes.
And that's the whole point. There's this, it's good to have this camaraderie, like people similarity. That's why there's support groups.
Right.
They're like there's certain similar themes, but we are all very different. And I think that's why I'm gonna shifting over to this idea of holistic approach. Ruth, it's been talked a lot about recently, and I've read a lot about this. But what impact has a holistic approach played in your own life? Because it's different for everyone. So.
Oh, absolutely. And I will tell you that it has made the world of difference. When I started my recovery, the first thing my doctor did was put me on medication, and rightly so, because we needed to come to a place where I
Mhm.
understood what was, happening with my body. But I was not submitting to the treatment or the recovery process. So it just became another pill on top of another pill. And I still
Yeah.
had my bad eating habits, and I didn't
Mm.
exercise and any of that. And, when I started exercising, when I changed my diet, I mean, to be honest, that was the biggest thing. There were things that I had to take out of my diet. There were things that I had to change about my habits in order to start seeing
Mm.
change. And it requires discipline. I'm not going to lie to people and say, "Oh, it was easy." There's no one and done, there's no magic pill, there's none of that. If you have a disease, if you have something that you're recovering from, it's going to require discipline. But if you can just apply a little bit of that, if you can make changes, I hated going to the gym, but I discovered I love running. So
Mm-hmm.
if I can go run 2.5 miles in the
Mm-hmm.
morning when it's cool, I don't have to go to the gym and I'm doing what I need to do. So,
Yeah.
you find what works for you and you find the best way to do it. And I can proudly say now that I am off of medication and
Yeah.
I am doing well because
Yeah.
of all the changes that I've made.
Yeah. And like, um, my wife and a lot of my friends close to me would say, I say this a lot, I'm annoyingly intentional. And, sometimes that rubs people the wrong way. But at the same time, what I find with that is, it helps me kind of retrospectively kind of look at what's going on around me. For me, it's not about being the first or knowing first. It's about connections. A lot of times it is about connections. And um, one thing I wanted to share was that when it comes to finding your holistic approach, finding what works for you, I feel the urgency sometimes we put on ourselves. Like it has, like we have these only if statements that really account to nothing. I do, yeah, takes discipline, but I also, I kind of look at it how we value ourselves. If someone does not value themselves at all, how much are they going to go and eat well?
Right.
Because it wouldn't matter. It wouldn't, like, what you think, how you feel about yourself will translate how you treat yourself. And that also regards to your physical.
Oh,
And I feel it's not like a quick fix. And I think a lot of people want that quick fix certainty. But, even when you do maintain, there's levels of stages of recovery. And one of the last stages is maintaining. But I tell people it's a journey. So you may be maintaining, but what's the one constant in life? Things change. So you might have to go back to the planning and then the action portion, and then you go back to maintaining. But that doesn't shift what your value is. And I've talked about value a lot in this podcast because I found that sometimes the root, and that's where we're going to lead into. But before we do, I want to kind of, you you have can you first explain, a lot of people, or I don't assume this, but could you share what when it comes to bipolar II, what does that mean to you? What is that diagnosis? What kind of things that would I don't know, be digestible to someone who doesn't know what bipolar II is? I'm not going to assume everyone who's listening does. And whatever you like, and also your new book,
Right.
When Love is Angry. Angry is always like, oh, you can't be angry, but honestly, I feel it's just like I'm stressed because I'm stressed. I can't be stressed. It doesn't help. So a lot of times anger is just a response to something that needs to change. So
Yes.
Ruth, go ahead, share.
Well, thank you for asking that, because I think a lot of people do assume that they understand what that is. Bipolar II is a mood disorder. It is bipolar itself. It is the disorder is where you go from a high to a low. So, and it can range in different people. So, you go from manic episode where you are just high, you are just, impulsive, you are doing things that you normally wouldn't do, to depressive lows where you are, you could be to the point of suicide. So bipolar II, you have at least one manic episode in your life. Mostly you have depressive episodes.
Yeah.
So I was diagnosed with the bipolar II. What I didn't know was that I'm a rabid cycler. I found that out about 5 years ago. So most people have about 2, maybe 3 episodes a year. I was having up to 6 episodes a year. So for every 2 months for 2 weeks, I would have an episode. And that was really hard to deal with. I mean, seriously, I say that with a little chuckle right now, because I'm in a better place. But I didn't understand what was going on, and my husband didn't understand what was going on, the way I already said. And, it took us a lot of years to come to that place where we could have an open conversation about it. We're both Christian, and we both come from that background that says, hey, why are you dealing with this? Why don't you just pray about it? And sometimes you need a little extra more than that. You need people around you. You need the medicine. You need to do more than just say, okay, well, I prayed about it and God didn't do anything. So When Love is Angry is it's our biographical journey. So it was it was our journey of how we came to that place after my diagnosis, and then how we responded to it, because we both, I'm not gonna put it all on him. He was more hands off, and I was like, hey, I need attention. And eventually, about 5 years ago, I was like, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. I had an episode where I just kind of fell out in front of, in a very public way, and I was like, God, I can't do this anymore. I need help. And that's when he started changing my life and changing my marriage. And just to kind of go back to something you said earlier, it's not just about the discipline, because what happened was I had a very low self-esteem. I had a very low view of myself. And I was always begging God, take this away. Why am I still dealing with this? And it wasn't just, if he had healed me of just the bipolar, I would still have a low self-esteem.
Yeah.
So if God starts working on you, it's not, okay, he's just going to heal you of one thing. He's going to make you whole, and he had to change my view of myself. He had to change my view of my marriage and all of that, so that, when I walk out of this, I can say I'm healthier. My body's whole. My mind is whole. And you know what? I actually like who I am. So, and our book journals that. It is a short book, but it is, it goes back and forth. So you get my husband's view, my view of it. And just our walking that journey together, actually to each other. So that's what it's been like.
Faith has always, well, not always. I came into the faith later on, in my early 30s, but it was a big part of my recovery, because for me, and I say this before I continue speaking, this is a truly outreach ministry, what I have. It's not proselytizing, but I do encourage the whole asking the question why you do what you do. The faith-based approach for me was encouraging, because I think things out kind of rationally. For me, the one constant, like I said, is change. But when I was reading the text, and I was reading it without all the baggage of fear that people try to instill, or some sort of, talking point, I asked, God doesn't change. And that was comforting. Just that simple notion, because everything does change. Relationships, people. I've lost a lot of people. Too short. Life is too short. I was a leader in my church, so sometimes I'll go to hospitals and hospice, and you begin to see I'm such a young person, and they're like, oh, you're so young, and with that kind of, and I just remember just hearing, just noticing, like, some of the most highly professional people, like in the hospital, on hospice, having less than a week to live, and it was never about the title. It was never about what they did or things they owned. It was all about the people around them. I think a lot of times there's, those who are Christian would understand what I'm saying. When we're kids, we're always told to give gifts, right? Yeah. But we when we get older, we're really bad at getting gifts. You know what I mean? And recovery is kind of humbling, because sometimes you need help. And if you're the type of person who doesn't like to get help, it gets problematic. And I think in the Bible, it did help me on that journey. I read a lot of Job, Ecclesiastes, and Proverbs, and kind of understanding the idea of, that things don't always, like, what happened externally to us will affect, of course, but it's how we see us. You kind of see, a car accident and you get a police officer takes, all the accounts, and they're all very different because people are seeing, even though the same accident, our perception and how we look at ourselves and is really important. And I'll end with saying on my faith journey was I realized, a lot of people read the prodigal son, they read, or better yet, the Good Samaritan. Very, very poignant right now. The Good Samaritan, a lot of people emphasize, everyone walking around them, but I always emphasize the question the lawyer asks in the beginning: who is my neighbor? And I would recommend that everyone's our neighbor.
Yeah.
But we sometimes are scared. And for me, I do not minimize that, but that also prompts the question, why do you do what you do? One of the most scary questions people don't like me asking when I'm like, youth come and they want a Bible study with me is, why do you go to church? They're like, don't say that because we need them here. No, I want to ask why. And I think in recovery, you have to ask why. One of my closest friends, she struggles with substance use. And I just remember she said, Robert, if every day was just not to drink, what's the point? Like, what is that? This feels so empty. There has to be more. So that's the only thing I'm promoting and really encouraging those who are listening is ask, what is your why? And I'm going to shift it to you, Ruth. What is your why? Why do you do what you do?
And I had to think about that because, for the longest time, I didn't think I could be happy. I didn't think I could not literally see beyond the depression. It got to the point where at one point I started idealizing death. And that's just one step above suicide.
Yeah.
And so it was just like, I couldn't see beyond that. And it was just like, okay, you hear about God healing cancer and healing this and healing that, but no one talks about mental illness. No one talks. It's not a real disease. Most people are like, oh, it's just in your mind. And I want people to stop looking at it like that. This is a very real illness. It is, they need, your friends, your family, because, the statistics are 1 in 4. So in a group of 4, one of them is dealing with mental health issues. So, I want people to understand that is very real and that God does heal that. The one scripture that I live by now is 1 Corinthians 10:13, where he says that there is no affliction that is not common to mankind and that God has a way out. And, for me, I discovered I'm gonna have to put in my work. I will have to change my diet. I'll have to change my mind, think about who I am and how I think about myself. But God has a way out. And there's a point beyond the depression. There's a point beyond, there's recovery for that. And there's a better place for that. And that's why, that's why I wrote the book. That's why I speak about this, that I want people to know that there is a better place for that, and we don't have to live with that.
Yeah. I always struggle with the idea of stigma because for me, it's different for cultures. Let's just be honest. I'm half Puerto Rican, half South Korean. What's going on there? So it's different culturally. I think a lot of times, at least from my experience, and I speak for myself, is that it stems from fear. And I'll give you so I don't for me, like I said, recovery is messy. So maybe I'm working with someone who's struggling. I'm coming in late, Ruth. So the family's upset. You know what I mean? Family's upset. But the thing is, they can tell me all they want, but I'm advocating for this person. Right. That's my job. Okay. And not only that, that's my job, I feel it's less useful. I do recognize, and I tell the person I'm working with, I'm like, you've probably hurt a lot of people along the way, but I'm not here to look at that. I'm here for present. I'm here to see where we go from here. That's it. And so I remember this one time, one of my friends, he had a sister who had autism nonverbal all her life. And I think this is the best illustration to kind of share what stigma for me kind of communicates. When I was going there, he's like, "Hey, you got, she's like this," and he was over explaining everything, and we're only gonna see her for like an hour, maybe two, and then I pulled back, me being, in recovery and all that stuff. I'm like, "Whoa, wait. I'm maybe an hour to maybe inconvenience for me if I won't even want to say that in that way, while this person lives her whole life.
Right.
I kind of the fear that he had this whole urgency to tell me, kind of speaks volumes of how I see stigma. Kind of relate, and it's not always so malicious. In that regard, it just stems from fear and just over explaining, and sometimes we make it so complicated. Why do we care about all this stuff? Because it's our families, it's our friends, it's our loved ones, and it's so messy and so different. And there's no certainty of one treatment will be fixing all. And I feel sometimes the process itself is so important. Like you said, if God just took away bipolar II, you miss the opportunity to grow. And the journey, a lot of times, I think is, in Spanish, is vacilando. I forgot. It's this one word that's not translated any other. I don't speak Spanish that well. My wife does, but I Spanglish, I guess. But yes, vacilando means throw the map away.
Right.
Throw everything. Just go. The emphasize the journey, not the destination.
Yes.
And I just want to, this one quote, to get your opinion. It says, "Leave everything undefined, including yourself. Befriend uncertainty. Fall in love with mystery. Kneel at the altar of not knowing. Give your questions time to breathe, and the answers will find you." It was Jeff Foster. When I heard this quote, I was like, it's haunting. It's like I don't think anyone, at least for me, I wasn't there yet to even put these words together. That's what people say better than I do. But at the same time, what comes to mind when you see this quote?
Honestly, it's and that was one of the things I struggled with. When he talks about befriend uncertainty, kneel at the altar of not knowing. That is the hardest part.
Yeah.
Not knowing, having that I don't know, but being willing to submit yourself to that. That takes a lot of faith, a lot of trust, and if you can do that, definitely the answers will find you. I mean, wow, though.
Yeah, one of the things that kind of relates, especially when I read and not to bring, when I read the New Testament, I remember there's this one, they were like, "Hey, Jesus, give us miracles," and Jesus like, a man who doesn't receive miracles and still has faith has greater, like he emphasizes that. And I feel at times there's so many variables, whether you're faith-based or not, whether you have a different reason for your purpose-driven recovery. There's so many variables, and we have to kind of accept that. Like we can't, there's no true guarantees, but what you have the most control of is how you see everything around you.
Absolutely. And that is the one thing I can walk away with, is that, what? There are certain things I'm not going to be able to control. I'm not going to be able to control when I cycle, when I do this. But you know what? I can control how I respond to it.
Yeah.
I can control how I respond to this world and make a difference.
And I think like when we touched upon stigma, sometimes we kind of urgently say, but we build on coping skills. At least, like for me, I do breathing, I do progressive, it feels better like to drink a fruit veggie smoothie. It feels better. It does, and it's funny because you like it. There's something about it, but that's and but with all that said, remembering your coping skills, remembering what worked, and being okay to do it. I tell my wife, I'm having a panic attack. So what do I have to do? I have to focus my breathing. I have to give myself time. This world is keep getting more and more busy.
Yes.
our value is hinged on how busy we are. And for me, I think sometimes we just need to slow down.
Hmm.
And slow down doesn't mean we do nothing actively. It's intentionally leaving things incomplete. That bothers me so much. I hate leaving things incomplete, but sometimes we gotta give ourselves room, and that, I feel, for me, has been very helpful. Ruth,
Yes.
any final thoughts as we wrap up? Thank you so much for sharing and listen for those listening today.
Oh, you're welcome. Final thoughts. Don't let anybody tell you what's possible or impossible. You know, like I said, if you'd have asked me 10 years ago if this place that I'm at, it was possible, I would have told you no. And I share this in the book, but my first doctor, our first appointment, the first thing he told me was, there's no cure for this. So you just got to learn how to deal with it. And, I think he was right, but his bedside manner sucked.
Yeah.
Excuse me, but
Yeah.
it was just because I was not in the place to hear that, and I was being told, okay, this is impossible, so just learn to deal with it. And I learned that that was not true. So I feel like I wasted time, but if you can just if you can come to the point where you learn what's possible and what's what's impossible for you, you can get past that thing, so don't let anybody tell you what's impossible, because with God, all things are possible.
Yeah. And I think a lot of times we put our value in things and other things and titles and only if statements. If there was only if statements that really made me valuable, I lost it years ago.
Right.
But I feel in reality, we it's when we allow to be not so easy to put our value in something in like that, put our eggs in one basket. That's an old phrase, but really understanding that value is something that looks different for everyone.
Yes.
But at the same time, understand the world keeps changing. People keeps changing. And Albert Einstein said this way: intelligence is the ability to adapt to change. That's it. For me, I think that adaptability, those who in recovery, we learn it. We're forced to learn it. And I feel at times that could be our strength. For me, what my why is as we close was helping people became my healing.
Yes.
And serving others became my recovery. People used to ask me, especially when I was really, hospital. Well, when I came, I was still, not doing well. I was living with my father and all that stuff. They're like, well, you're older, you're supposed to.
Yeah.
But for me, I was looking at what I needed to do for myself and to get myself ready. And I feel here I am, married, doing well.
Yeah.
And for me, it was not bitterness on my family. I would say this all the time with my family: I can never pay them back, and that's okay. For a first generation American, that is horrible to say, but it is one of the things that I feel I was able to do. I want to say thank you, Ruth, for sharing your insight today. I want to share with those who are listening, watching, that there's various platforms that you can watch to keep updated with Revive Ministries. The website is the most connected, but it's reviveministriesfl.com. I'm going to leave you with this last quote, and it reads: our most basic instinct is not for survival, but for family.